Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our re-recording of our webinar, Populating the ITAM repository from yesterday. We wanted to make sure we got a clean version up for you on the website, so it'll be up there for you to share with your colleagues and friends in the world. Susan Odell, Managing Partner at RAPA Consulting, and beside me is?
Pierre Paquette, also from Managing Partner at RAPA, and yes.
Lead presenter today.
Lead presenter. There you go.
Okay, so we'll get going right away. We've got quite a bit of content to cover, and definitely as we go through, make your notes on questions you may have, and please send them off to info@rapaconsulting.com. We'll get back to you right away in response to your questions. Okay. So to cover the agenda, there we go. I think we've done half of the brief introductions already. We'll tell you a little bit more about who we are as a company and then move into a lot of content quite quickly. This is a foundational point, making sure that you understand why the current state of your ITAM maturity matters in terms of your expectations of what you're going to be able to get out of every step you take in IT asset management. We'll then look at ITAM data sources and the activities that you need to go through to validate those sources. Based on the data that's available and good and usable, how you can look at setting realistic management objectives based on that. And then Pierre will take you through quite a lot of detail in terms of managing hardware and software asset properties and what data could you manage. We'll give you a pretty extensive list of examples, not completely exhausting the list, but a good picture of what you could do, why you might choose to do it, and what the benefit is to the organization if you do manage those data points. And he'll take you through some technical visualizations of that data. Then we'll move into an ETL approach to data gathering, which is export, transform, and loading of the data. We'll then summarize the presentation, talk about some things to look forward to in March, and then we did have a few questions from the last session, which we'll review today so that those answers are there for all of you. So on that note, let's just talk a little bit about RAPA. We are an enterprise consultancy. We are services only, and we are dedicated to working with end user customers really to succeed in IT asset management. We are unique in that we understand the business processes which are primarily financially driven, and then the technical application of technology to support those business requirements. Our expertise from a platform perspective is in the Microsoft space, and we've completed many projects over the last number of years with organizations of varying sizes from 100 end users up to many in the tens of thousands. So Pierre, the content he's going to present today is based on real-world experience and what customers are going through. So lots of good stuff ahead. In terms of, again, this is important to us, and we think to our customers as well, is that we don't resell, we don't receive finder's fees for software, so we have no incentive other than helping you succeed in making the right decisions around process, around data, around technology that's a good fit for your organization. So that's a key point we want to stress. And that we're a team player, we're friendly, not just because we're Canadian, but we work with your existing Microsoft systems integrators. If you're working with MCS, maybe you don't have an SI at play. We also have some obviously skills with System Center as well, but we just want to make sure that you can realize results in IT asset management and software asset management. So on that note, over to you, Pierre.
Thank you, Susan. So before we actually jump into talking exclusively about data, it's worth spending a bit of time just going over a maturity model. So it's important from an organization's point of view to understand where you sit in terms of your ITAM maturity. It goes a long way in identifying what is realizable and what you can do, and that you are successful. I mean, that's really the bottom line. Is you take this a systematic approach and to be successful in deploying your asset management practice. So whether you're in a chaotic maturity level where you've got spreadsheets and you're scrambling and being reactive, or whether you standardize your processes and you're being more proactive, there's always gains that can be made and advances to your practice. Now, with the maturity model, we also identify 5 key success factors, and these are basically, organizational commitment, the importance of, the organization being behind the ITAM project. The people, whether you have the right people in place, whether you need to find them, if you've defined your roles, so that again the work can get done and people know what they're doing. Processes, tied to the data, as we'll see, that the importance to have processes to follow the full life cycle of your asset, from receiving it to disposing it, and that is through process. Data, of course, is what we'll talk about today, and then finally the 5th key success factor is really technology. And technology in this case is really the enabler, taking your process and your people and all the good data you're gathering and being able to make sense of it and maximizing its use. So technology being the enabler, and even taking it one step further to being the enabler in terms of automation. So we'll talk briefly about that later on in the presentation. So these success factors, when we talk about data as a success factor, we quickly realize that data alone isn't an ITAM practice. Often what's happening is people have these spreadsheets and they're gathering data, and they do all this work to clean it up and to put it in place. But if they don't have any of the other, the commitment and the process and the people, well, that data alone doesn't make up the practice. Data, as I mentioned, is present through all stages of maturity, whether you're chaotic and you're juggling spreadsheets and lists and so on, or you're at the highest maturity level where you've got COTS applications that are manipulating data and generating data for you and linking and making all the relationships between the data. It definitely needs to support your objectives. Again, tied back to your maturity level, if your objectives are to be more aware and be proactive with contracts, then obviously contract data is important. So it has to follow your objectives.
And that's a good point, Pierre, in that ITAM is big. So you just said key thing. Maybe contracts and improving contracts is a goal right now. Maybe it's as simply as we have no clue where all of our laptops are. So it really is getting that tactical with the things you're trying to achieve.
Right, and as we'll see when we look more at objectives, it really is it's a walk, don't run approach, where contracts is good, but before even managing your contracts, you have to know what you have. So that's an objective in its own. It's just knowing what you've got. And again, just to reiterate the importance of process and making sure the data remains accurate. Otherwise, its value diminishes rapidly. And yeah. So in terms of objectives, we always go into these projects, or we go into these ITAM projects setting objectives, and often the objectives are there to begin with, but haven't been validated or prioritized. So it's really important that the objectives are realistic and are related to the maturity level at which you are at. So that's one important statement. Objectives do come from various stakeholders. So not only are the objectives IT asset management based, but they will be from your finance department. They'll be from your configuration management, your service management environments. So really to be aware that those stakeholders are important and that the data is not just for IT asset management's consumption, but really to benefit the organization as a whole so that you can realize your return on your investments. Because the objectives are tied to your maturity level, it makes only perfect sense to tackle the objectives in multiple phases. As you become more mature, you will then tackle the objectives. There are certain objectives you will see that rely on objectives from previous phases or previous maturity levels. So that is also an important point as well. So don't jump into managing your software usage if you don't have a clue of what you own, as an example. So some normal progression to objectives, from a chaotic state, the first thing you probably want to do is basically know what you own and centrally manage the information. From that, you define your roles, your policies, and processes, which will help you routinely gather, validate, and accurate information. and then helping you with the overall life cycle management of your assets. Once you have a good sense of how your software and hardware is being used, and with the help of contract management, you can then optimize the use of hardware and software, limit over purchase, and software compliance. I mean, these are all the objectives that people want to dive into initially. And then, realizing that the objectives do come from multiple stakeholders, that making that information available to those stakeholders will then go towards your total cost of ownership, your strategic decision making, as well as your maximizing your ROI.
So an interesting point, if you could go back just one slide, if you look at where software asset management, where software compliance is on the list in terms of the progression, many of the customers we see are pretty motivated by a SAM project, and they don't realize the things that are the dependencies that SAM has. So just for everybody watching today, look at the things that you need to really be thinking about and managing before you can achieve compliance. It's not as simple as applying a license optimization tool, for example. Those are great things, but there's a lot more that needs to be in place to make it successful.
Absolutely. All right. So moving on, the source of data then becomes the next thing to look at is really to understand what data do you have. And in a lot of cases, you'll have some databases with some data, some asset data, some software data, either from COTS applications or information aggregators. Maybe you've got some custom databases, access databases that you've got assets tied to or assets in them. If you're in the process of migrating from one environment to another, or from one system to another, well, you have that information that you're bringing across as well. And then just in general, ad hoc databases that maybe different groups have created just to facilitate the management of their assets. Well, when you're bringing this under one centrally managed database, then you have all these different ad hoc databases to be thinking about. Spreadsheets are definitely going to be in play. Everyone's got spreadsheets with data in them that they're just trying to get a handle on. Keeping the data up to date is one thing, and then consolidating the information into one repository. CSV files are very similar. I mean, lists, right? There's just lists of data. Vendor reports, working with the various vendors. From a hardware side of things, you'll be receiving, receive lists, so a list of assets you're receiving or that you've ordered. From a software side of things, you'll get what software you've purchased and how you're covered, and when you're due to update your maintenance and support. So this is all information from vendors. Definitely not to discount the information coming from your manual processes, right? When you receive an asset, you'll be updating your repository or updating something. So that's your manual updates or process-driven manual updates. Discovery tools. Discovery tools are an important source of information in terms of ITAM, but not to be confused that the discovery information is the beginning of your asset management. So just keep in mind that discovery tools were made to find software and hardware that it can discover on a network. So things you need to consider, how accurate and valid that information is coming from the discovery tool. And then manual inventories using Excel templates, walking the floor, finding your assets. It doesn't sound very appealing. In some cases, you may be forced to get back to that level, especially if your discovery tools aren't able to find the assets. How do you know that they're there, and how do you know that you own them? Some manual activity might be necessary.
So again, just reinforcing how important process is. Process is what's going to enable you to catch the gaps in the things that technology can do for you. So that's critical. Whether it's ITAM or SAM, without good process, your risk of success is going to be greatly diminished.
Right. And some more technology. Handheld scanners. They're great. They have their uses in different processes. On receive and deploy, you scan a barcode, goes to your database, tells you what you've got. So again, there is handheld scan tools that are a part of solutions, and there are standalone handheld scan tools that can be integrated as part of your data feeds. That's information you're getting to help you manage your assets. So all these wonderful sources of data need to be validated, and part of the validation is really to determine where the information is coming from Can you rely on it? Are you going to get it on a regular basis? And then depending on all those questions, then you can determine whether it's data more suited to the initial data population of your repository, or it's complementary information that you're not even going to rely on it to create the database or the repository, but you'll use it to maybe add additional information based on where it's coming from. If it's not so much trusted, or the trust level is unknown, then it's data that you'll probably end up using for reconciliation and validation. So that's one of the processes that asset management should be doing, is really reconciliation and validation as part of audits. So not only the software audits, which is your compliance, and you're doing other things as well, but also on the hardware side too. To understand that how much discovery is being done by your discovery tools. Am I getting a 90% coverage? Am I getting a 60% coverage? Am I finding assets I don't know about? Am I not finding assets that I should be finding? So things like that, that is really more part of an audit than it is as an information feed, as a source of your assets. So keep that in mind. And of course, looking at data as part of the deployment of your practice, or as an ongoing, or on an ongoing basis, as a data feed into processes. Again, process updates can be automated through feeds from your vendor. Obviously you'll be doing some manual updates through process as well. And again, data is just coming from those various sources. All right. So you've got data, you've got sources of data, you have a good sense of, you can trust it or not. What data do you need to actually start collecting? Well, don't collect data for the sake of collecting data. I mean, there are, 100 different properties that you could capture for IT asset management, but do you want to capture them is really the question. You have to have a process behind it. You have to have a need behind it before you actually start thinking.
What's the business going to gain by the overhead of managing that piece of data, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it is a cost. There is a cost to it, and oftentimes we actually talk about that. What's the cost versus the reward? So keep that in mind. So you will align your data towards your current and future ITAM objectives. Objectives are a little not odd, but there are some objectives that you want to achieve today. And there are some objectives you may be thinking about down the road. You may actually start collecting data for those future objectives today. Whether you'll use that data or not, you'll make that decision, but at least you'll have some data where you can actually do some trending and maybe mold your objectives around the data that you can realistically gather. You will identify and document things. Obviously, your practice is important. Part of your processes and procedures, identifying what's important and why. Why are you capturing the location on deploy? Why are you capturing who it's going to on deploy as well, and so on. Then, part of that, and we'll go through it again. We were talking about process pretty often, but it is key that as one of the fundamental key success factors, that it is in place, so that on your receive and deploy, your manage, your retire, dispose, return processes, you are capturing data. You're capturing the data you want to capture to support the objectives. And then, and consider the resources, or the ITAM resources you have available. These are the actual physical people. We kind of talked to that as well. Right? If you have the ability to keep track of all this information or not, and that then goes into the decision of what you're tracking.
And I think for a lot of you that are listening out there that are immature or chaotic in IT asset management, I'm sure that you do not have dedicated resources to ITAM. Typically what we see is that you've got IT resources, systems administrators that are doing some of the work. You've got the IT procurement person who's doing some of the work, but nobody's really dedicated to these job functions. And it's as you mature that the organization begins to invest and fund these roles. So looking at your people and how they're segmented into this is going to be a key factor.
Yeah, that in itself is a topic. We could spend a half hour, 45 minutes just talking about what actually works in terms of the resources you need to do ITAM. Today, however, we're talking about
Right.
data, and so from a hardware asset management point of view, some properties that you'll definitely come across. You can Google, ITAM properties, and you'll come up with a very similar list. But what I've done here is I've categorized them, and I'm starting with the identification. So being able to manage something, you have to know it's there, and being able to identify it. So identification is important. Typically, asset management, we start talking about asset tags, but ultimately I think the serial number is the key identifier for your assets. Asset tags are great for the assets that are being used by end users, and it gives them something that it's easier for them to find and to quote, when they're calling a help desk or when they're talking about their assets. So a little bit difficult to flip an asset over and to look for a serial number. If you've got an asset tag that's stuck to it, it's easier for them to actually quote it. But asset tags are good for some asset types, but not all. So that's one of the considerations in this case. So serial number is definitely an important one. And then we've got asset name as well. Asset name, yeah, it's a name, not necessarily always. It's bound to change on an asset. It's a name, but it can also be used as one of your identifiers. Physical characteristics obviously are important so that you can validate that, in fact, what you're looking at is what you bought. So if it's a laptop or a desktop or a network device, make and model, just helping you manage the list of assets you have, giving you a catalog of what you're managing. Hardware catalogs are important for evaluating the services you can provide. If you have everything under the sun, it makes it difficult to support that. But if you're standardized on a limited set of laptops and desktops and just other assets, it just makes it easier for your service people to then provide service and quality service. So this is the type of information asset management can provide to help make those decisions. Manufacturer part numbers, locations, and descriptions, all valid. Assignment and usage, basically who's using it, who's responsible for it, has it been assigned to a department or a cost center. We're starting to talk a little bit more about the organization here and how it relates back maybe to finance. Cost center is more of a financial thing than it is than a management thing maybe from an IT person point of view. Status, obviously, to do lifecycle management, you need to keep track of status. Lifecycle statuses will help you identify, the assets that maybe you've ordered and haven't yet received, what's available in your storage, maybe all the way down to what's in transit, to keep track of things as they move around your organization. Financial information, which is really the key to IT asset management, the financial management of your assets. So things like receipt dates, purchase order numbers, invoice numbers, end of life dates, cost, and maybe even you keep track of maintenance costs, depreciation costs, and then thinking of the life cycle again, disposal dates, maybe some additional notes just to keep track of things. Contract information in the form of warranties. Typically, people rely a lot on the vendor to find out if assets are still covered by warranty. Now, to be able to be proactive and to have a better view of your assets as a whole in terms of what's on warranty and what's not, it is important to keep track of what assets are on warranty, when are they due, and who they're warranted by. Maintenance and support follows as well. This is mainly tied, I guess, to infrastructure assets, not so much to desktops and laptops. Lease agreement information, obviously, and the schedules that they're tied to help you keep track of what you own and versus what you lease. Start and end dates will help you manage, the return cycle of those assets. Too often we've seen companies struggling with assets that are still in the organization's possession, and they're still paying penalty fees, on the assets that are beyond the end lease date. So just some gains to be made there, and then just keeping track of events that are tied to these assets. So the financial events, again, the financial management aspect of managing assets, there may be a need to keep track of events, repairs, how much did it cost, when they were done. Also helps you assess, the assets you are purchasing and whether, they're lemons or they're not. I mean, if you're paying a lot of money in repairs, then you have to, maybe look at the incidents that are tied to it, and factor in information from various environments to make a decision that it makes sense to keep supporting this type of asset. If not, it's time maybe to refresh them and to cycle them out. So just some key information. And finally, there's a list of other types of properties you could associate to hardware assets. Usage information in terms of if they're being used more often, room, condition, environment, if it's part of production or if it's part of a development environment. It really depends on the type of asset, first of all, and then whether it is in support of one of your objectives to find out what you are tracking.
So this slide is really interesting for you as end customers, in that when you're deploying IT asset management, it's critical that you have someone on your team, whether it's someone internally who's done this before and understands. You can see the majority of the data points on here are financially or vendor contract based. Again, there's a teeny bit of overlap with configuration management data, but most of it is outside of that scope. So, or if you are working with an external source to help you, you must identify someone as part of your implementation team that understands how these things all come together. It's a significant risk to the success or failure of your project.
Yeah. So you kind of got me thinking of something else we can say about these properties, and that you probably noticed that we don't have configuration management specific properties here, things like MAC addresses or IP addresses. And the reason for that is, we really want to draw the line between what you're managing for asset management and what configuration management needs to do their job. Obviously, there's some overlap, and in the cases where there is overlap, if it's easier to keep the information in the two separate systems, then that's better, because then there's no duplication of data. However, you may need to be able to bring in that data into your asset management database so that you can then make decisions. So if it's hard to get the number of cores or PVUs on a server, maybe that's information you'll keep track of as a property in your database. However, if your discovery tool is just readily finding that for you, then there's no sense in you tracking it as an asset management point of view. It's there in configuration management data. The information that comes from various sources will be linked. I mean, there's going to be a common link between information. So serial number is an obvious one, and it's often used to link configuration data to asset management data. But purchase order numbers and purchase order line item numbers can also be used to help you track down the purchase records that are tied to these assets. So when you need to actually prove that you own an asset, if the PO number, or having a PO number and a PO date is sufficient, that's good. But if you have to take it one step further, then you know that that's a key identifier, or a key item that you will use to get into another system to find that information. All right. Discovery information. I forgot about that, but we talked about that, exactly. So you'll bring it in, or you might not. So where does this really leave us? So there is a long list of properties there. So part of your evaluation and validation is really to create a table and say, okay, what property am I interested in? What am I getting in return? And how is it tied back to the objective that I have in place? So something as simple as asset name or tag, asset tag, and asset serial number, it really is the basic level of identifying your asset. And what does it give you? Well, it gives you a chance to have a list of knowing what you own. Right. So if we take that one step further with make and model and description, it's a bit more information, helps you validate it towards maybe discovery information or information coming from the vendor. Location. So in this case here, the location from an asset management point of view, it's the location where the asset has been deployed. SCCM can tell you where it is, maybe based on an IP address, or maybe even some location information in the discovered information. But there is a distinction between the location you're keeping track of from an asset management point of view versus the location you are getting from your discovery tool. So in one case, it's telling you where it should be. In the other one, it may be telling you where it is. If they're not the same, well, part of that hardware audit should be, why has my process broken down? Do I need to fix something? So user is again very similar. If you're tracking who the asset's assigned to, it's easy to find out who's using it. They're your top console user, your primary user, or who it's been deployed to. And again, through process, when it gets deployed, the user gets recorded and assigned to the asset. I mean, this information you gather through your service request and move it down into the asset, but it's important that this information is gathered on the asset.
And gathered independently from the discovered, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Discovered and updated independently from your discovery tool, right?
It may end up being the same value, the same person, but the approach to how it gets into the ITAM repository is different.
Yeah, absolutely, because yeah, you don't want your ITAM data just shifting around based on who's using the asset. I mean, that's not really giving you anything in return.
Right.
But anyway, from the discovery information, you have that information. This is information above and beyond that. Right. So it's cost center information tying back to financial accountability, lifecycle status that helps you do your lifecycle management, and maybe even financial management to be able to provide lists of assets that have been disposed. You know, going towards the capitalization maybe of assets and knowing what you have and what you don't have. Purchase order line items, you know, proof of what you own. We talked about that. And then warranty and end date, start and end dates. Again, being proactive versus reactive. You being the keeper of your own information and not relying on other entities to tell you what you have and, you know, when it's due to be refreshed or if you have support. All right. So there's multiple, once you have decided on what properties you are interested in capturing, obviously you can start capturing that data. And the simplest way is using an Excel spreadsheet. Here's a spreadsheet that you could use, and I'll just open up Excel here and take a look at it from an Excel point of view. So here I am in Excel, and you know, I've broken things down into, you know, all the different properties that I've identified, you know, in that previous list, and I've outlined them here, and I've even put down some, you know, what values could possibly be used in each of those fields. So lifecycle status being ordered, received, stored, deployed, and so on. Types of assets, you know, desktops, servers, monitors, architecture, infrastructure, equipment as well. Ownership status, you know, identifying if it's leased, if it's loaned, if it's owned. And I'll just scroll over, and you can see, I think I go all the way to 50 plus different asset properties. And you know, if we go all the way to the far right, then we can see maybe some more asset type specific properties that you may be interested in. You know, from a computer point of view, you'll be interested in whether it's primary for secondary usage, you know, what room it's in. If it's a mobile device, you'll be interested in keeping track of maybe the phone number, the IMEI number, and so on. For network devices, you know, maybe a room. For servers, maybe an additional rack to know where they are within the server room to be able to easily find them. What environment they're part of, whether it's production, staging, development, or pilot, and so on. So you can see, I mean, you could have a pretty extensive template. The goal isn't to create a template that's unmanageable. It really is to keep a template of the properties you are able to collect and capture, and then make use of them going forward. And you know, moving again through maturity, going from spreadsheets to maybe a COTS application, these could then be used as import or input to creating your repository within a COTS application. Additionally, what I've done is I've modeled the same data in Access. So again, taking it one step further, making use of relationships within a more formal database environment, trying to make the database as normal, you know, from a normal form, you know, database lingo here, and identifying what the relationships are. So here, when we look at hardware assets, and I'll just take the asset, which is this table here. You can see some pretty basic properties I've included in that table. But if we look at things like cost centers, how does that relate to a hardware asset? Well, we have that relationship show up. If we look at the model, you know, there's a relationship there as well. If we go from the manufacturer, it's in here somewhere, or it's a company. I can move company over here, and you can see that, you know, company, you'll have a long list of companies, and they can be models, they can be yeah, what do I have here? Suppliers, they could be models, they could be vendors, and so on. What else would be interesting to bring up? Maybe warranty information, same thing, more contract information here. Lease schedules, if I bring up the lease schedule, you know, again, showing you what assets are part of what schedule. And, you know, our basic statuses, ownership and life cycle status, those could be, you know, linked up through tables as well. locations, and then users, same thing. So you can see this. If you were to create the whole schema, it would be pretty overwhelming. So putting it this way or creating in an Access database here gives you a better sense of how the data is connected and how you'll actually be keeping track of it. And the final step or final representation of the data that I want to show you is really using Service Manager in this case. What I've done here is I've basically extended the Service Manager CMDB. I created a very simple class. It's a hardware asset class, and if I just double click on one of these, and it'll open up the form that goes with it.
Just a point of clarification for the viewers, it's Microsoft System Center Service Manager, not to be confused with HP Asset Manager, I believe. So just make sure we get that across.
Yeah, this is definitely it is System Center Service Manager. The environment gives you CMDB and the relationship between data from different from different management groups. So you've got incidents and you've got service management requests. You could also keep track of your hardware assets. And the reason why you'd have this all under one CMDB is really to benefit from the relationship between information from these various disciplines, right? It's to really benefit that way. So you can see just by the form here, and there's a handful of different properties that I've included. By no means is this an asset management solution. Really, this is just to show that it is possible to do it within the environment and to benefit from the relationships. There are COTS applications that provide you with the functionality to do this within Service Manager. And I wouldn't recommend anybody taking the route of creating their own classes and trying to keep track of things. I mean, it's development, right? It's not configuration. It's truly development when you get to that. All right, we'll come back to this when we start talking about what we can do in terms of loading the data later on in the presentation. So if I go back to here, let me just skip through these slides. So this is the one showing, more of the items in the schema, and again, Service Manager and some forms that go with it. So that really covers the properties that we wanted to talk about in terms of hardware. So from a software point of view, we basically did the same thing, and we've broken them down and categorized the information for software. So for software, we are talking about software assets, but it becomes a little bit more complicated when it comes to managing your software. There's so many areas of software asset management that need to be looked at. So not only are you going to keep track of what you're discovering, you will keep track of what you've purchased, and then you'll keep track of the contracts associated to it. So there's really multiple areas of importance within software asset management. And to add, software asset management isn't like doing hardware asset management where you're just dealing with lists of physical entities with attributes. You're dealing more with contracts. So you're keeping track of lists of software assets you own, but you now have to relate that back to the entitlement that comes with the agreements that you've signed, or that when you purchase software, you're following terms and conditions. So software is that much more complicated. It is tied more to the contractual aspects of managing assets versus the keeping track of where they are and how they're being deployed. I mean, that part of it is important as well, but by far, just the concept of compliance and following entitlement just adds to the complexity. So the properties that you'll need to capture will reflect that as well. So here in identification, we're talking about software titles and versions. So giving you basically a list of the titles that you want to manage, but also about manufacturer part numbers, which will tell you what you've actually purchased. So through that part number, you can then go back and trace, what you've bought, how you can use it, and what you're entitled to use it for. License information will then help you determine what you're entitled, or your entitlement. So, how many you've bought, what type of asset is it? Is it a base license, or is it an upgrade license? What versions you're entitled to in terms of upgrades and downgrades. License unit, is it user-based? Is it device-based? Is it concurrent user? Is it by PVU, by core? There's so many different license units that now things become more complex because, for each one of those vendors you're dealing with, you need to understand what you are entitled to. And vendors will and have changed their entitlements over time as well. So you have to be on top of this thing. Right. Cost center information, department information, license keys, all that stuff goes towards the license. The financial information is also important to be able to validate that you've bought and that you own the software that you've purchased. So for POs, invoices, suppliers, cost, current value, depreciation, so on. Agreements, so the overall license agreement, maintenance and support that's tied to it as well. I mean, this is information you will keep track of. Then we get into, not only do you capture, what's being used, you're capturing what you're entitled to, but now you're going to start capturing how it's supposed to be used, so who it's assigned to and what device is assigned to. So once you start capturing this information, you're in a better position to say, okay, what have I bought? Who's using it? And, and I'm managing it, so it's important, so I can then keep track. And so there's different aspects that need to be considered, and these properties all fit into that. Take management one step further. You can start allocating blocks of licenses out to cost centers and departments. But again, that will really depend on the objectives that you're trying to attain. And then lastly, usage statistics. Now you can get statistics from different applications. SCSM provides you with some of that, but you will be interested in knowing how it's being used, how often. Concurrent licenses, are you hitting, are you maximizing your concurrent licenses ever? If you are, then maybe you need more licenses, and if you're not, maybe you've got too many. So really the usage is really to help you then manage that information more accurately. So we'll just take a couple of minutes to look at each property and what you're getting back in return in terms of your objectives, similarly to what we did with hardware. So if you're tracking your titles, your versions, it'll allow you to actually manage your software down to a title and a version. If you're not tracking your entitlements, your assignments at the version level, then you really can't do anything at the version level. So it's just common sense that you need to track it by version if you want to be able to report by version. Software entitlement, keeping track of what you've purchased, if it's an upgrade or a downgrade, and over multiple acquisitions. Manufacturer part number, as I mentioned, is a really useful tool to go back to the vendor and say, listen, this is what I bought, and what can I do with it? So it goes towards knowing what you own, your software compliance, your vendor management, and also software license compliance. Oh, I said that twice. Your license units, obviously, right? You keep track of if they're assigned to users, to devices, to cores, to concurrent users. Maintenance and support, again, maintenance and support is really important to be able to track what you've bought. When you buy software, normally you're buying it based on software you've purchased in the past, and sometimes that's one of the difficulties of getting the software information is really tracking back through time to know what you actually purchased. The vendor will tell you what you own based on their records, but sometimes, if there is a discrepancy, how do you track that, and how do you contest and prove? So in order for you to be able to prove what you own, you have to keep track of it. And with software, you need to be tracking it over time. You've bought a version, you've upgraded again, you've bought maintenance. That maintenance entitles you to versions, and then you've bought more maintenance. And if you look over time at any of your software products that you've purchased, you will need to walk through the various items that you've purchased and the information.
And just one quick point, just to remind you of the overlap between software and hardware asset management. Just one simple example of where the physical asset is geographically that is running the software. For example, you're going to have some software applications that have rights of use that are geographically based. And if your people are moving based on a job change, particularly for multinationals that may be on the call, this is a significant consideration. So you do need to properly manage hardware and key points that have a direct relationship to the compliance of your software assets.
Yep. Always tie it back to your objectives. Users, obviously, assigning the assets to users. I mean, this is again tied to your process. You know, a request comes in for software, you approve it, you assign it. When you do your discovery, it's a validation, right? You're finding software on somebody's device. You can check your assignment, and yes, they're authorized to use it. If they're not authorized to use it, then you need to look at process, has it broken down, and then assess whether that person still needs the software, and then giving you the information you can then use to do your harvesting and to maximizing your use and reuse of software. So again, they all have a role within achieving your objectives. So as I did with hardware, I created some spreadsheets. Let me just bring that spreadsheet up. I'll do this a different way. Here we go. In terms of software, as I mentioned, it is a little bit more complicated. So in this case here, I've created 4 tabs within this Excel spreadsheet. So I'm looking at software, entitlement, usage, and assignment. So keeping track of the information again in spreadsheets. And then again, from an access point of view, showing it to you, and I'm just going to, here, I'll close out this and just reopen it, and then we can do basically the same thing with software. So if we start with the software title, and then, software types gives you there's no relationship there, so let me just get rid of that. Let's see what else, our versions, right? Oh, for some reason my relationships are not showing up. There is a relationship between these two. It's somehow disappeared. And then your agreements. Oh, something had to go wrong.
There was a ghost in your computer.
Yeah, so somehow my relationships have been removed. Let's see if there's anything else in here. Purchase order for entitlement. There we go.
There's one.
So we got an entitlement record, and it's tied to purchase order information. It's also probably tied to companies, right?
There we go.
We got some showing up. So same approach. You define the objects that you have. You identify the relationship. Again, thinking of databases to maximize them. You create there's the third normal form or something along that line to maximize not only the information but to reduce the repetition of data. So that's one of the important things with databases. All right. So when it comes to populating data, data is data. Once we've identified the source and what we want to do with it, we really now have to take it from one object or from one form and bring it into our repository, maybe the CMDB or a SQL database. It's been done. It's been done a lot. It's taking data, transforming it, and the approach that's typically taken is an ETL approach, where it's more about extract, transform, and load. And then so the ETL approach, extract, transform, and load. And one thing to be aware of when it gets to that point where you're actually taking data from one system to the other, to not underestimate the effort that it takes to get the data from source to destination, especially on the initial deployment. There's so much data that's being manipulated and looked at during the initial deployment. The effort to do the transformation is first of all iterative and will take time. So take it through a life cycle of initiation, finding your reference data, validating, transforming, staging, reviewing, and then when you're happy with it, then publishing it. And if you're not happy with it, then you start again and you tweak, you extract, transform, load, and then when you're satisfied, then move on to the next step.
Can you just talk a minute about, on some of the forums, we've seen some people commenting on how, like, oh my gosh, people are still using spreadsheets like they have no value. and they play a role. It's not a matter of COTS versus you graduate from Excel spreadsheets and you never use those again. Can you just talk about how that fits into the ETL approach as well?
Yeah, the spreadsheets actually do become quite handy when you're actually doing the validation. So instead of staging it all the way to your final repository, that staging may be in an Excel form where it makes it easier to actually validate the data. And the reality is IT asset management data is in spreadsheets. It's everywhere. Again, it depends on the maturity, but even when you become standardized, there's still that the remnants of people keeping track of lists. And Excel being the tool that it is, that's universal, and people can do incredible things with it. From pivot tables to from formulas to pivot tables, and just creating ad hoc reports quickly. The data is out there in spreadsheet form, so definitely that is one of the sources of data, and also a good tool to get to where you want to get. So if we look at each one of these steps individually, when we talk about extract, we're really talking about how do I get to the data, what format will it be in, permissions, are there permissions tied to the data, is it a one-time, is it a 5-time extract, during initial data population, or is it something that can be automated and reliably delivered? So key points in terms of extract. Transform is really like I said, the place where you're going to be spending most of your effort. So identifying your common identifiers so you can connect data from multiple sources and create complementary versus base information. Consistent formats, very important if you are going to automate the loading of data, that you have consistent dates and numbers and strings and so on. Definitely lookup lists are the way to go to get the data first of all into a database, and minimizing 5 ways of typing the same information. But also from then a usability point of view going forward within the tool, having people select or pick from lists as opposed to having free-form text where they're typing things in. And again, creating data that needs to be validated and cleaned up. So lookup lists are very important. Multi-use fields are also an issue during import, that if you're getting data from sources where 5 different data items are stored in the description field, well, it makes it difficult to take data out of a description field and make use of it in an automated way. Transforming obviously is the key activity, where you're taking coded values and creating relationships or finding other information. Cleaning up data and removing notes and just text that you historically use within spreadsheets to maybe represent a blank field, or a blank field is a blank field. You don't need to actually say it's a blank field. Rolling up multiple records into one, as well as transposing a single record into multiple records if it's needed. So again, the transformation is really where you're going to spend most of your effort. Loading it is quite simple. Once you get to the load, you're basically got data, you're satisfied with it, it's accurate, and you're going to then decide, am I going to use it to create new records, update existing records, or maybe even delete records that are already in a repository that I'm trying to create. Definitely exception handling and reporting goes a long way during this phase. Tools and utilities available out there. There's lots of different tools. If you're dealing straight with SQL, well, you can use SQL. Data destination, database schemas, you must be familiar with them to get data in. But you can also use stored procedures and functions and whatever to help with maybe the transformation of the data going through. COTS provided import utilities. Obviously, SCSM is a good example. They've got an import connector, and basically helping you take CSV files and bring the data into that repository. The other COTS applications have their preferred way of getting data into the repository, some making it easier than others. So they're often tied back to one-time tasks, whether you can schedule them and you can automate them through runbooks and through Orchestrator and through whatever else. You can also make use of PowerShell. PowerShell is very much in the news these days in terms of how it's going to be used going forward within the Microsoft stack. It has been, and now it's being used more from a management point of view for there's Service Manager automation and so on. But PowerShell and the commandlets tied to Service Manager help you actually formulate or format the data, providing a level of abstraction yet again, allowing you to automate them, tie them to tasks, and to incorporate into your ITAM procedures. Now, on that note, what I wanted to show you is doing some of that within Service Manager. So you'll notice here, it's back to where we were before. I have my 5 assets. And if you look at some of the tasks over on the right, I've created a couple of them, export refresh candidates and import hardware assets. And the import hardware assets is really the one tied towards getting data into the repository. And all I've done here is I've taken a PowerShell script and basically built a front end in front of it so that you can go and pick a CSV file. If I open this CSV file and just with Notepad, you can see it's just a CSV with a lot of data in it. But this this import template or this PowerShell script will basically help you select it and then actually process it. So it does a level of validation, giving you some feedback, and then basically calls the connector, the Service Manager connector, to do the import. And it's telling me it's done. It tells me to close it. It's completed. Now when I do my refresh, you'll notice I've got more than 5 records within my repository. So taking the CSV and quickly turning around. PowerShell is powerful. It could also be used to do some of that transformation. So taking data, doing lookups, maybe even referencing other databases while it's preparing the data to bring it in and to automate it.
So again, a reminder that if you have invested in a COT solution that's native to Service Manager, the same approach could be applied to that solution with its own particular classes, etc. Yep.
And we've put a couple of videos out in our website that talk about export these two actual PowerShell scripts. The other one that's out there as well is the export. And then basically all this does is it allows you to specify what your end of life period is, and it'll tie it back to information that's on the hardware asset, giving you also the ability to say where you want the exported file to go. So it's creating a CSV file. What you do with that CSV file, you could do 100 things. You could open it up in Excel and create an ad hoc report as quickly as that, pivot tables, the whole works. But just to show you that PowerShell is quite a useful tool.
Just a point of clarification there, you mentioned videos on PowerShell, not videos, but there are 2 blogs.
Oh yes, sorry.
No, that's okay, where Pierre has put up the actual PowerShell scripts and commandlets that you can download and just modify for your own use. So that's available on our website on the blog.
Yep, and if you follow us on Twitter, you'll find out when we actually post additional ones. There's always little tidbits and things that I've come across doing deployments that could be useful. Definitely, yeah, there's a 1,000 things you can do with PowerShell. All right, so let me take us back to our presentation. Put there.
By the way, you shared with the audience a little shot of you canoeing.
Oh, really?
So that was great. It got to know your outdoorsman side.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, there we go. We're back. So that's our load. And okay.
Okay, great. So great session. I hope you have been making some notes and you'll be able to send us some questions that we can answer for you afterwards. Just to summarize, so Pierre talked about the 5 fundamental ITAM success factors, and today the focus was on data, but it's very important to remember that to get to that place of available and accurate data, you have the dependencies on the other 5 success factors to get there. So they're all interdependent, and you have to look at these things all in parallel and advance them together. Reality check. Where you are in ITAM maturity is fundamental to how you're going to succeed in any component, whether it's ITAM or software asset management. So you have to be able to know where you're standing. We do offer a fixed cost assessment program that will help you put some perspective on where you are and so that you're not setting objectives that you can't reach. So take a look at that on our website. You can find that off of the front page. And then once you know where you're at, then you can think about the data that would be important to manage based on where you're at and the type of asset that you're trying to manage. So break it down. It's to be successful in ITAM, you really have to break it down into reasonable bits that you can succeed with. To let you know what's coming up, we will have our next webinar. We're aiming for the second Tuesday of every month to have a regular schedule when we'll be sharing our thoughts with you. And in March, we're going to focus on one of the other success factors, technology. And as we said at the beginning, we are vendor agnostic, customer-centric, services-only organization. And we don't endorse any particular product. We work with customers to make sure that they are accessing technology that makes sense for their requirements and their environment. So we're going to take stock of the different ITAM, SAM, and IT financial management solutions that are out there focused on Microsoft System Center. What role do they play? And what do you need to think about in terms of the business considerations, dependencies, and impacts of the classes of technologies in this space? And how does ITAM maturity influence the decisions that you might make around technology investments? So that's our March webinar, so look forward to sharing that with you. And we'll take time now to let you know about a program that we haven't published on our website yet, but it's coming imminently, which is training. So ITAM and SAM fundamentals for Microsoft System Center environments. So if you are an organization that has deployed and is really focusing your system management around Microsoft System Center, what does it mean to deploy ITAM and SAM in that environment? So it'll be a one-day virtual course that will take you from the things that you need to do to plan successfully. What is your multi-year plan for IT asset management? What do you need to think about? How are you going to be able to deploy the fundamental processes? This was a very, I don't want to say superficial, but this was a high-level review of data and the implications. So it'll be a deep dive into the data that's managed in IT asset management and software asset management. And then where does System Center play a role in that? What are the opportunities and what are the limitations? Because I think the reality of what it means is important for you to be successful. And then we'll also talk about the third-party technologies in more detail in terms of the roles that they play. Granted, it's not just IT financial and SAM, but there's also the financial management component, and there's some pretty cool technologies out there in that area as well. So look out for that, and we look forward to increasing the knowledge in the space in the Microsoft environment. Oh yeah, questions, right. Okay, so we had a few questions come up, and I'm going to throw them out to Pierre, and then he'll answer them. You haven't even seen these yet.
No, I haven't. Yeah. You're going to put me on the spot.
I am. Okay, so one of the questions was, how much of data management is the responsibility of the ITAM manager versus IT?
Oh, good question. That is actually a really good question. One of the, we kind of talked about at the beginning of the session where we talked about roles and who's responsible for what. Well, asset management, IT asset management, is responsible for identifying what properties they want to keep track of because they are tied to the objectives, and those are IT asset management objectives. IT are whether they know it or not, they are part of the IT asset management practice, and they, from a practice point of view, they then become more the feet on the street who are using the information and maybe even updating and providing feedback on the accuracy of the information. So the ownership is definitely ITAM, but IT is involved.
Great. Okay, second question, and this is from Tom in Ohio. And I'm just down here. Okay, let me read it for you. Okay, I'm slow on the gun. Okay, how do you track which tool, if you have multiple tools providing data, may supply data to your ITAM system? My guess is you would want to know if there are any gaps in coverage.
Okay, yeah. The goal is to have a central repository where you have all the information you need from an asset management point of view. Part of audit is also identifying the data that's missing. So when it comes down to the audit, then you can then realize why am I not getting this information and where am I lacking in coverage. The reality is information will be coming from multiple sources, right? Whether it's from the vendor, from your discovery tool, or multiple discovery tools, whether it's from a barcode solution that's feeding information as well. I guess the objective there is to vet your sources, realize which ones you trust, which ones are a source of truth, and which ones are maybe complementary information.
And hopefully do that before you're populating the database.
Yeah, you're doing that.
Try to do that ahead of time.
Yeah,
right?
you are doing that when you're realizing that, yes, I want this data and this is how I'm going to use it.
Right. So if you're doing that ahead of time, then it should be part of your process to track what tools are.
Yeah. Okay. And then your audits will tell you where you're lacking in coverage.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, great. So last question that we thought would be useful for the audience today. We had someone ask, you know, if I haven't really begun in managing this data, what do you recommend as a starting point if I don't have anything in place today? Well,
yeah, it's down to the basics. It's doing a maturity assessment, understand where you are, and probably you're at chaotic or at that first stage. The second one is then to realize, you know, the success factors and your objectives. Again, data is not the only place to start. So, you know, do you have organizational commitment? Do you have people that are ready to take on that role? Is that organizational commitment also in support of putting in place processes and procedures? You know, if you have processes and procedures and they're not supported, then they're toothless tigers, right? There's not much you can do with them. So yeah, where to start is definitely understand your maturity level, define your objectives, then start looking at the key success factors and addressing them.
And I think the organizational commitment doesn't necessarily have to be, now you need to go to the CIO's office and get some significant funding. It might be organizationally within your department. What kind of support can you get to do things that you can control today and build up over time, right? So,
yeah, they would represent the different stakeholders. Right. So they're different stakeholders at different level, and they have objectives. But you'll quickly find out or find that, you know, everyone is interested in saving money, obviously, within an organization. So the objectives will be far-reaching. Yeah.
That's a good point around the business case for ITAM is strong. Okay, so let me just go, how can I go back one slide there? We don't really have to, I suppose. Yeah, topics. I guess I'd have that in the next slide too. We would love to hear from you on things that you would like us to cover. We can't promise that we'll cover everything that you suggest, but we certainly will if we can. You know, so let us know, info@RAPA Consulting, and how can we help? So we're here for you, the end customer. We've intentionally established RAPA to help you, you know, demystify IT asset management. For some of you, you're along the path and you just want to make it better. Maybe automation is your goal. We know in the Microsoft space there are more of you that are in, you know, the chaotic. You're becoming aware that you need to get a handle on this. That's just the reality, and so we want to help you in any way that we can.
Yeah. So and the point is we've basically lived deploying asset management at various organizations at various levels of maturity. And, you know, not only from a practice point of view, you know, we have that knowledge, but also from a deployment point of view and making it practical and actually making it successful. Too often, you know, the will is there, but the knowledge and the capability of actually doing the deployment and realizing what's involved in the deployment, you know, is where the gap is and impacts the success of your projects.
So we do have many more resources. I think there are 3 other videos up right now, and the blog posts, etc. So if you visit the resources section of our website, there'll be some more information that will help you immediately. And following RAPA, if you are on Twitter, LinkedIn, or Facebook, we'd love to see you follow us. You can get the breaking news in terms of the new things that we're doing and more information to share. And I think other than that, thank you very much for taking the time today. Hope you got a lot out of it. And I'm Susan Odell. You are?
Pierre Paquette.
And we are RAPA. Okay, have a great day. Thanks.
Good.